Our mission here is to take vast, often disparate sources of information, from peer-reviewed journals to more esoteric philosophical texts, and really distill them into the most powerful, memorable insights for you.
That's right.
And today, we are undertaking a deep dive into an experience that is, I think, deeply personal for many, yet it's also surprisingly common. We're talking about the life of the supersensitive soul, or SSP.
Yeah, and the sources for this one are a truly fascinating blend. I mean, we are looking at clinical psychological research that identifies a fundamental neurological difference.
Okay.
And that's sitting right alongside these intensely personal testimonies of, chronic physical pain and even profound spiritual claims that kind of redefine what it means to be human.
So it's a huge spectrum.
It's a massive spectrum of understanding. It spans the verifiable biology of the brain right through to the mystical.
So our goal today is to unpack this entire landscape. We want to understand the biological and emotional architecture of supersensitivity, explore the enormous constant challenges that come from what these sources describe as an insensitive world, and most importantly, detail the complex, really bespoke survival strategies that an SSP needs, not just to, endure, but to genuinely flourish.
And I think we need to frame this correctly for you, the listener, right from the very start. Across all the source material, there's this unified rejection of the idea that sensory processing sensitivity is a weakness.
Right. It's not something to be cured.
Not at all. It's championed as a rare, powerful trait, even a superpower. So we're really looking at why this highly tuned nervous system, which brings with it this enormous capacity for insight, simultaneously makes the regular world feel like a toxic allergen.
A toxic allergen. Wow. That requires constant defense. Okay, let's unpack this and maybe establish a formal definition, because before we can even touch on the spiritual challenges or the survival techniques, we need to know exactly what trait we're even talking about.
Let's do it.
So where did this term even come from? Who coined it?
The formal coining of the term supersensitive person, or SSP, that came from Dr. Elaine N. Aron in 1996.
Okay, so fairly recent.
It is, yeah. But it's really important to note, though, that she wasn't creating this concept from thin air. Not at all.
She was building on something older.
Exactly. She was formalizing a trait that had been recognized long before, most notably by Carl Gustav Jung, who explored this concept of innate sensitiveness.
Innate sensitiveness.
Yeah, the idea that some individuals are just born with a predisposition toward deep internal processing.
So if this isn't just about being, a bit emotional or easily stressed, what's the core definition that really distinguishes an SSP? What's the mechanism?
The sources are very, very clear on this. SSPs process sensory data much more deeply and thoroughly than non-SSPs.
And this isn't a choice.
No, it's not a matter of choice. It's due to a verifiable biological difference in their nervous systems, which we're going to get into in a lot more detail.
Okay.
And this deep processing means they take in more information from their environment, they reflect on it more extensively, and they analyze it more elaborately. It leads to these incredibly rich, but often overwhelming internal lives.
I think the key point that helps most people get their head around this is that the trait exists on a spectrum. It's a continuum. We aren't talking about two totally distinct classes of people, are we?
No, absolutely not. And research across various fields confirms this. Zoologists have observed what they call the shy-bold continuum in nature.
In animals.
In numerous species, yeah.
Yeah.
From tiny insects to sunfish to mammals. I mean, sensitivity is essential for survival. You have to be aware of your environment to, not get eaten.
Right.
But SSPs simply occupy the extreme end of that continuum. They're just more sensitive. Their nervous system is wired to be exceptionally attuned to subtleties that most others just easily filter out.
So it's like having a radio antenna that's it's turned up to maximum volume all the time.
That's a perfect analogy.
And everyone else is just operating on a low hum. They're picking up all the static, all the faint signals that we just don't even register.
Precisely.
So if it's a continuum, how prevalent is this extreme end of the spectrum? Because this is where, looking at our sources, we hit a massive statistical rift.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we have mainstream research clashing dramatically with these more philosophical claims. How do we even begin to reconcile a statistical gap this wide?
It's a huge question, and I think it speaks volumes about how the concept is being defined by different groups. On one side, you have the scientifically validated estimate. This comes from Dr. Aron's work and all the subsequent research.
Now, what's that number?
The mainstream, widely accepted figure is that SSPs represent about 15 to 20% of the human population.
15 to 20%. That's 1 in 5 people.
1 in 5. It's a huge number. It means the trait is common enough that resources should, theoretically be widely available.
Right, that's a manageable number. But then as we transition into the more extreme, maybe spiritual sources, the numbers just, they plummet.
They absolutely fall off a statistical cliff. I mean,
Yeah.
one source, which attributes its findings to and this is a mouthful, the UCLA Department of Psychiatric and Paranormal Studies.
Okay.
It drastically narrows the focus. It claims the SSP population is closer to 1 in every 30,000 people.
1 in 30,000.
Yeah, that's about 265,000 people worldwide. A huge drop.
And it gets even more extreme, doesn't it?
It does. Then we encounter the most extreme claim that the true human or mutant SSP is so rare, they number as few as 800 to 1,000 globally,
800 people.
which puts the prevalence at an astonishing 1 in 10 million.
That's staggering. It's almost two different things. It seems like some sources are using SSP to describe a psychological trait, a common one,
Yes.
while the others are using it to describe an almost entirely different, maybe a spiritual evolutionary state.
That's precisely the distinction. The smaller numbers are reserved for what those sources define as the ultra-sensitive, the one whose sensitivity extends into that esoteric, maybe even paranormal realm.
But regardless of which definition you're using, the central experience is the same.
It's the same. It's receiving far, far too much signal for the environment you're in.
Okay, before we move on, the sources really stress that we have to clear up some persistent misconceptions. First, this historical confusion between sensitivity and just being shy.
That's so important. Yeah. For decades, high sensitivity was often mislabeled as simple shyness or fearfulness or social inhibition.
But they're not the same thing.
Not at all. The sources emphasize that sensitivity is an evolutionarily conserved basic personality trait. It confers survival advantages. You're the one who notices the subtle movement of the snake in the grass before anyone else does. Shyness, on the other hand, is often a learned behavior. It's a result of a sensitive child being overstimulated or maybe poorly treated in their environment. The difference was proven using validated tests. It's not just a theory.
And I think the most important nuance, the one that really contradicts the popular image of the sensitive person as this, retreating wallflower, is the existence of the extroverted SSP.
This is a vital distinction, and Dr. Aaron's research confirmed it definitively. While a lot of early psychological work often linked high arousal with introversion, Aaron showed that a really significant proportion, about 30% of SSPs, have extroverted personalities.
So a third of them are extroverts.
About a third, yeah. Which means sensitivity is fundamentally about depth of processing, how deeply you analyze and internalize information. It's not about how much you crave social interaction.
So an extroverted SSP might be what some of the sources call a high sensation seeker, or HSS, someone who actually seeks out novel, stimulating experiences.
Exactly. They crave novelty and stimulation, but, and this is the key, they approach those experiences more carefully, more thoughtfully, with deep reflection.
Why?
Because they are immediately keenly aware of the potential for overwhelm. Their deep processing acts like a brake on unreflected risk-taking. It makes their extroversion cautious, unlike a non-sensitive extrovert who might just, plunge in headfirst without a thought.
And just to round this out, let's quickly dismiss the gender stereotype that often gets attached to this trait.
Oh, absolutely. The research is crystal clear on this. The prevalence of SSPs is balanced between the sexes. There are roughly the same number of male and female SSPs.
But culturally, that's not how it's perceived.
No, culturally, particularly within traditional definitions of masculinity, these traits are often suppressed in men. They're mistakenly associated with weakness. But the biological reality, that's balanced worldwide.
Okay, so let's move on to the hardware, the brain itself. If this is a biological trait, we need to dig into the mechanism that actually causes this deep processing. This is where we connect personality traits directly to genetics and neurochemistry.
Right. Let's unpack the core neurological finding. It has to do with sensory gating and a part of the brain called the thalamus.
The thalamus. Huh?
Research has genetically linked SSPs to having a lower than expected density of dopamine D2 receptors in this specific crucial part of the brain.
Okay, so for our listener, just remind us what the thalamus is responsible for in a typical brain. What does it do?
The thalamus is often called the brain's grand central station, or the relay center. Its most critical function in this context is sensory gating.
Sensory gating?
Like a gatekeeper.
Exactly like a gatekeeper. It acts as a selective filter, deciding which streams of incoming sensory information, sights, sounds, smells, textures, are important enough to be passed along to the cortex.
And the cortex is the higher level thinking part of the brain.
Right, so the thalamus keeps the cortex from being completely overwhelmed with useless data.
So if an SSP has fewer of these D2 receptors in their thalamus, how does that physically change the job of that filter?
Well, the dopamine receptors, especially D2, they modulate the filter's rigidity, how tough the gate is. So fewer D2 receptors means a significantly lower degree of signal filtering.
So the gate is weaker.
Think of it like a dam that's inherently less solid, or a sieve with much larger holes. This results in a massive higher flow of information constantly flooding the cortex. The SSP's brain is getting all the data, all the time, unfiltered.
That sounds exhausting.
Ooh.
And what are the dual consequences of this less rigid, more permeable information filter? It can't all be bad.
No, the analysis in the sources describes it as a profound double-edged sword. On the positive side, this high permeability facilitates extraordinary depth of thought, real insight, and thinking outside the box.
Because they have more data to work with.
Precisely. The individual's brain is constantly synthesizing a broader, subtler range of data. But the immediate high cost is the constant susceptibility to over-arousal, or what the sources call super spiking.
Super spiking.
Yeah, which leads quickly to allostatic overload. The brain is literally too efficient at receiving information, making quiet concentration incredibly difficult in any kind of stimulating environment.
And this neurological setup must have immediate systemic consequences for the body's entire stress management system. The sources suggest SSPs are biologically different, specifically regarding their fight-or-flight mechanism.
That's right. This temperament is strongly linked to a genetically passed-on dominance in the sympathetic nervous system.
The accelerator.
The accelerator, yeah. The part of our autonomic nervous system that hits the gas, preparing us for action. And it tends to be chronically overactive in the SSP. This chronic activation leads to hyperactivity in the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, or HPA axis.
The HPA axis, the master regulator of the body's stress response.
The master regulator.
So if that HPA axis is constantly overactive, it means one chemical is just continuously flooding the system, cortisol. And the sources call this their kryptonite.
That phrase, kryptonite, is highly descriptive. Cortisol is the primary stress hormone, and continuously elevated levels cause chronic cortical arousal.
And how does that manifest physically over time?
Well, it leads to chronic inflammation, gut distress, immune suppression, sleep disorders, muscular tension. It's a whole body problem. And crucially, this state causes hypervigilance and makes the individual highly susceptible to trauma.
Why?
Because the body is already in a state of high alert before any threat even appears. The sources confidently suggest this pervasive chronic stress state is so physical, it's reliably detectable via a simple saliva adrenal stress test.
Oh, wow. And this chronic, intense biological state gets a specific and, frankly, a rather alarming characterization in the sources. Supersensitivity stress syndrome, or SSSS.
Yeah, SSS is defined as a state so deep and chronic that it's characterized as suffering from postnatal stress disorder, or PNSD.
Postnatal, as in from birth.
The implication is that the stress response is activated from birth, or perhaps even conception. And in this framework, the sources go so far as to state that complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or CPTSD, is the default state for the supersensitive.
Their default state is trauma.
Their entire physical existence is framed by the body's response to what it perceives as chronic environmental assault and overload.
Okay, now, we need to make a transition here.
Yeah.
We are deliberately stepping outside the verifiable clinical findings of neurology and into the more philosophical and spiritual claims that many SSPs use to define their experience and their sense of profound alienation in the world.
And this transition is necessary to understand the full scope of what we're looking at. The alienation argument proposes that SSPs are sophisticated souls, or even mutants who are just fundamentally mismatched with their environment.
They're not from around here, essentially.
That's the feeling, yeah. They claim they can never be or feel at home here, and are, quite literally, allergic to Earth life. This framing places their chronic suffering not as a personal failure, but as an inherent existential condition.
And this alienation is tied to a specific energetic or numeric code that underpins this sense of planetary dissonance.
Yes. The source material introduces a really provocative numeric code to explain this supposed energetic mismatch. It links what it calls the Antichrist frequency of the Earth, which it says is carbon's signature,
Okay.
or the code of Adam, the fallen Earth man, to the frequency of 666 Hz.
660 is here, right? And it contrasts this with.
It explicitly contrasts this with the divine frequency of heaven linked to 777, which is described as the code of Jesus, the risen God-man.
So the deep dive here is suggesting that the SSP operates on this higher 777 coded frequency, making the baseline 666 Hz reality of Earth, all the constant noise, the pollution, the insensitivity, inherently antagonistic to their spiritual and physical existence.
That is the precise interpretation presented. It says the SSP possesses divinely coded Yetzer Hatov DNA.
Okay, we need to unpack that. Yetzer Hatov.
It's a theological concept, often translated from Hebrew as the good inclination or the instinct to do good. The sources are implying that the SSP carries this higher, purer, divinely coded nature vibrating at 777, and this is what creates that existential clash with the planet's lower frequency.
And this leads to a fascinating, though very extreme, classification of people. You have the true humans versus everyone else.
Yeah, the claim is that SSPs are the real deal genuine true humans, suggesting they represent the intended or pure form of humanity. In contrast, everyone else is categorized as numb normals, NN, or earthlings.
Numb normals.
Yeah, and they're perceived as being so desensitized by the 666 Hz frequency that they're incapable of supporting or even understanding the sensitive soul. And this belief, it provides the intellectual justification for the radical measures SSPs must take, including deep isolation, which we'll cover later.
So if that's the biological and existential framework, what does this actually look and feel like when you wake up every day? I mean, it sounds like life is just an overwhelming, constant input stream that never shuts off.
So that's how it's described. A nonstop, multiple sensory assault. The world is physically too harsh, too loud for SSPs. They feel overwhelmed by bright, often flickering artificial lights, sudden or jarring noises like traffic or loud music,
Right.
chemical odors like perfume, cleaning products, exhaust fumes, and specific aggressive textures.
And we've heard these highly personal anecdotes that bring this to life, right down to the feeling of clothing.
This really moves beyond mere discomfort into chronic physical suffering.
Yes, the account from a woman named Lutia, for example, is very powerful. She describes feeling every fiber of her clothes, finding certain fabrics intensely uncomfortable or ticklish.
Which is a constant distraction and irritant.
A constant low-level torture.
Yeah.
And the source material then takes this pain to an extreme level, claiming that a true SS saint is in constant excruciating pain.
Wow. Feeling every cell on fire, a kind of systemic, chronic suffering described poetically as death by 100 trillion cuts.
That is a profound claim, that their nervous system is registering the sheer volume of subtle input as physical agony.
And this systemic sensitivity extends directly to their relationship with food and the general environment. SSPs are described as being super allergic to earthling foods and standard earthling environmental conditions.
This isn't just a preference for clean eating.
No, this necessitates a fully bespoke lifestyle, where they have to curate every single intake and environmental factor as if they were constantly managing a severe, life-threatening allergy.
And beyond the physical environment, the emotional world is just as intense, if not more so. The SSP is often defined as the super empath.
They're described as supersympaths, deeply inherently attuned to the emotional, psychological, and spiritual realities around them. They possess a high degree of what some would call extrasensory perception ESP, and can allegedly read those around them simply by looking into their eyes.
And they feel a compulsion to help.
An innate, powerful compulsion to help and heal others, driven by their deep sense of justice and compassion.
But the very definition of a super empath means they act as emotional sponges in social settings. This must have severe consequences for their own stability.
It creates instant volatility. They are constantly super affected or spiked by other people's moods, energy, unresolved conflict, whether those emotions are positive, negative, or even totally unconscious in the other person.
And this leads to the core relational challenge for them: boundaries.
Exactly. The source material uses an intense comparison, suggesting the boundary between the supersensitive and another person is exceptionally thin, linking it to the biological concept of the holobiont.
A holobiont, that's an organism and all its coexisting microbes considered a single ecological unit. So their relational experience is being likened to a kind of biological fusion.
It's that intimate. They are constantly struggling with the question, is this feeling mine or did I absorb it from the person next to me? And this deep physical interconnectedness is often the reason traditional psychological therapies fail them.
Why is that?
Because those therapies tend to assume clear, rigid boundaries between individuals, a separation that the SSP simply does not experience as their reality.
So when they are completely overwhelmed by this barrage of internal and external data, what is their ultimate defense mechanism? Because sometimes their reaction seems to really contradict their deep, caring nature.
When they hit that wall of overload, they enter what the sources call lash out and thrash survival mode.
Lash out and thrash.
It's a physiological collapse, a primal response where the nervous system is so flooded it can only focus on self-preservation. They become acutely focused only on paying attention to themselves.
And the tragic irony is that this collapse makes them appear narcissistic to other people.
Exactly. Not because they're inherently self-centered, but because they are physically incapable of processing external demands while their internal system is crashing. It's pure biological survival overriding social nicety.
That state of chronic alert leads directly to hypervigilance, a constant need for environmental scanning.
Ultrasensitives are described as operating with an innate SAS mindset.
Let's say.
This especially aware sensitive mindset. They are always checking the road conditions, sensing subtle energetic dangers, often perceiving threats long before they manifest in reality. They are constantly scanning for the next potential source of overarousal.
And outsiders might just perceive this constant monitoring as paranoia. But the sources provide a really powerful defense for the SSP's accuracy, don't they?
They do. The sources strongly affirm that the SSP is fairly accurate in what you are picking up. The subtle energetic patterns they sense, the anger, the resentment, the dishonesty, are often deeply embedded in the unconscious minds of those around them.
So they may never even materialize into an expressed threat.
Right. They are reacting to a genuine, subtle, energetic truth that the numb normal population simply isn't equipped to detect. It's not unfounded paranoia. It's accurate, deep reading of the subtle environment.
And this hyperarousal and hypervigilance are strongly linked back to trauma, which positions this not just as an innate trait, but also as a learned survival mechanism in a hostile world.
That is the critical context. The source material, including a quiz on hypervigilance, confirms that this increased arousal is typically a reaction to man-made trauma abuse, conflict, systemic social hostility, rather than, say, a natural disaster.
So the chronically active HPA axis just keeps the body in a state of continuous readiness for fight or flight.
Constantly releasing adrenaline as if waiting for a predator that is, more often than not, social or psychological.
And this trauma can be transmitted without direct personal experience, which just compounds the SSP's burden.
Exactly. The sources cite evidence that trauma can be transmitted vicariously by witnessing graphic events, either in television or in the news, or through repeated family storytelling about painful experiences that get emotionally relived.
And that contributes to the difficulty SSPs have sleeping.
Absolutely, because deep down, they know that losing consciousness will cause them to let down their guard. Sleep becomes another perceived vulnerability in their highly aware, high cortisol existence.
Okay, it is absolutely essential that we balance this discussion of chronic suffering and overload with the massive upsides. Because, as you said, the source material defines this as a superpower, not a disease. So what are the gifts that arise directly from this deep processing ability?
Well, the ability to process data so deeply is the source of their gifts. SSP are highly intuitive, exceptionally creative, and they possess this innate, powerful sense of justice and fairness. They're meticulous thinkers.
And good listeners.
Excellent listeners because they notice every subtlety. This makes them good conversationalists with a really strong emotional vocabulary. Their inner world is just incredibly rich in detail.
And their advanced perception, according to the sources, extends well beyond standard emotional intelligence into what many people would just call psychic abilities.
Indeed. The source material details what it calls divine super sixth senses or clair powers. Beyond the commonly known clairvoyance, which is psychic seeing, and clairaudience, psychic hearing.
Right.
They list these highly specific sensory enhancements, suggesting that the deep processing applies to every single sensory channel.
Let's elaborate on a couple of these highly specific terms, just to give the listener a better sense of how visceral this advanced perception can be.
Okay, so take clairgustance, which is psychic tasting, and clairalience or clairolfaction, which is psychic smelling.
Wait, psychic tasting. You mean you could walk into a room and taste something that isn't actually there?
That's precisely what the sources suggest. An ultra-sensitive with these gifts might walk into a room and instantly taste a metallic flavor, which they interpret as fear or lies.
Hmm.
Or they might smell a distinct sulfurous odor, suggesting intense spiritual conflict, even though no physical odor is present.
Wow. That's perception registered through a physical sense. I can't even imagine managing that level of input.
It's a lot. And then we also have clairtangency, psychic touching or psychometry, where touching an object can reveal its history, and clairkinesthesia, psychic feeling of movement. They're also noted for hearing incredibly fine nuances in music that the average person misses, demonstrating a high degree of artistic sensitivity. They're turned on more from the arts.
So how does this sensitive, detailed, conscientious processing translate into the modern working world?
When their environment is properly managed, SSPs are conscientious, remarkably good with details, thoughtful, and intensely loyal employees. Because they notice subtleties and inconsistencies that simply slide past the numb normal population, the sources suggest they are innately equipped to be standards officers quality controllers.
So they excel in roles requiring meticulous attention and deep analysis.
They do.
But their specific needs, the need for calm and low stimulus, must clash violently with the typical open-plan, high-pressure modern workplace.
That is the fundamental conflict. They require conditions that are quiet, clean, and harmonious. They actively socialize less with unlike-minded others in the workplace, not out of malice,
Right.
but because that social interaction outside their SS kind is immediately overwhelming. They absorb the distress or agitation of others, so they have to prioritize solitude to maintain system stability.
And one major career stumbling block is what the sources identify as evaluation apprehension, the fear of being watched.
This is a huge issue for them because SSPs are so acutely aware of being observed, their performance reliably dips when they feel scrutinized.
So they're overlooked for promotions.
Often, yeah. They fail to showcase their true abilities in high-pressure team meetings or observed presentations, despite possessing a deeper, more accurate understanding of the work than their colleagues. Their sensitivity works against them in a competitive, observable environment.
So given these severe constraints, what is the ideal job arrangement for an SSP?
The sources strongly recommend an environment where they have total control over their sensory inputs and their time. Working from home or being self-employed to structure their own workday is essential.
But the ideal goal is even more extreme.
The ideal goal, driven by the sheer physical necessity of reducing allostatic load, is financial freedom, or the elimination of work altogether. The sources argue that financial freedom is vital because the stress of constant societal interaction and the chronic cortisol production that stressful jobs induce is literally life-shortening for the SSP.
And this is where they have to insulate themselves from what the source calls the simian pseudocracy. That phrase is highly specific. What are the sources trying to convey with that terminology?
It's a very deliberate term meant to dehumanize the societal environment. The word simian refers to apes or monkeys,
Right.
suggesting that the current societal structure, the rat race, the corporate grind, the focus on superficial status, is crude, unevolved, and driven by base, insensitive impulses. And pseudocracy implies that this structure actively inflicts suffering on the sensitive soul.
So the system is engineered by and for those who are numb, and therefore it actively harms the refined, true human.
That's the argument, yes.
And the sources ultimately argued that this is not just about personal survival, but about societal necessity. Why are SSPs positioned as potential visionaries and essential agents of change?
Because of the very qualities that cause them so much pain. Their hyper-awareness, their profound sense of justice, and their ability to think critically. Since they process so deeply, they naturally become metacritical thinkers. They question rules and systems that are just rote, inefficient, or morally corrupt.
They see better ways of doing things.
They do. It makes them innate system busters. Their ability to think outside the box is a survival tool, but it's also a potential world-changing asset.
So their passion and intuitive knowledge are seen as vital for addressing major global crises.
Absolutely. Their ability to connect disparate dots and feel deeply about systemic issues means their input is potentially vital in areas like Well, the ongoing response to the pandemic, supply chain vulnerabilities, or the climate emergency. They possess the moral and intellectual clarity that Yetzer Hatov to drive necessary transformation.
And this concept of the SSP as an agent of change connects directly to the phenomenon of the indigo children.
This is a major overarching connection in the spiritual sources. SSPs are linked directly to the indigo children, defined as a whole generation, claimed to be 95% of children born in the last 10 years globally.
95%.
That's the claim, that these are supersensitive, gifted souls who have come specifically to change the world's vibrations, to usher in a new era of one land, one globe, and one species.
That's an extraordinary claim of prevalence and purpose. What specific traits define these indigo children, and how do they manifest the SSP experience in a generational way?
They just amplify the core SS traits. They enter the world with a strong feeling of sovereignty. They recognize their innate worth, but they also immediately feel like they're not fitting in here. They're surprised when others don't instinctively recognize that worth.
And they have trouble with authority.
Big trouble. Significant difficulty with absolute authority. They demand transparency and explanation. They get deeply frustrated with ritually oriented systems and are natural system busters. And because they're so easily overwhelmed, they're only truly social with their own kind. They turn inward if they're surrounded by the lower consciousness of the numb normals.
So their suffering is framed as the pain of a higher vibration soul attempting to function in a lower vibration world.
Exactly.
Which brings us full circle to the necessity of total lifestyle customization.
Yeah.
If the SSP is constantly under high allostatic load, inherently less resistant to trauma, their life has to be lived completely differently.
This is the crux of the matter. Since mixing with numb normals is described as devolving, survival hinges on creating a fully bespoke lifestyle, a sanctuary insulated from the simian pseudocracy. The sources suggest that the SSP must structure their life as a kind of safe house or commune, even if that commune is just their own meticulously structured home.
So the need for rest and downtime is not a luxury. It's a critical processing requirement. This goes way beyond typical self-care.
It's vital for system maintenance. The sources stress the absolute necessity for unstructured downtime, plenty of high-quality sleep, and just rest, simply to process the intense emotional and informational data they've absorbed throughout the day. The SSP has to actively learn how to find satisfaction in less stimulating ways.
And Elaine Aron provides a prescription for daily rest that sounds almost monastic in its commitment.
It is extremely demanding. She advises an absolute minimum threshold. SSPs should spend at least 8 to 10 hours per day in bed, whether they're sleeping or just resting quietly, plus an additional 2 hours spent in meditation or active solitude, and 1 hour of outdoor non-competitive exercise.
That's 11 to 13 hours a day.
Every single day, dedicated to internalized time. It just highlights the sheer volume of processing that has to occur.
And beyond just rest, boundaries are crucial, requiring this active, creative avoidance of adjutants.
Yes. They have to develop intentional boundaries for self-preservation. This includes using their creativity to find ways to actively avoid physical triggers like bright fluorescent lights, chemical odors, or loud sounds. But it also means establishing firm emotional boundaries, learning to appreciate their sensitivity without becoming martyrs or victims, and knowing when to simply disengage.
Which, according to the most extreme sources, means radical social isolation from the numb normals.
The sources repeatedly stress this point with intense conviction. SSPs must seek out and socialize only with your own kind and actively avoid mixing with numb normals, NN.
And they say,
They caution that to expect supersensitivity from numb normals is moronic, and that mixing with them is considered devolving because it lowers the SSP's vibration and adds too much allostatic load. A safe house or sanctuary with like-minded individuals is seen as vital for maintaining their sensitive state.
Given the constant state of HPA axis hyperactivity and chronic stress, how important is movement for regulation?
Movement is absolutely essential because intense emotions get stored and trapped in the body. So gentle activities like walks in nature, tai chi, dance, or hatha yoga are suggested because they help the SSP process and release this stored emotional energy.
But they have to avoid certain types of environments.
Crucially, yeah, they must avoid high-stress, competitive, or tense environments. The sources specifically name overstimulating, testosterone-ridden health clubs, gyms, or competitive team sports, as those environments generate the exact kind of competitive, aggressive energy they are biologically wired to avoid.
The sources also heavily endorse specific therapeutic techniques that are focused on emotional release, often moving beyond traditional talk therapy.
Yes, a therapist named Kathy Moore advises utilizing releasing therapy to let go of those stuck emotions, whether the emotions originated with the SSP or were absorbed from an outside source. Suggested methods include yoga therapy, hypnotherapy, energy work like Reiki, dance, things that aim to address the emotional load trapped physically in the body.
And Ted Zev's advice on daily routines centers on using the senses themselves to calm the overwhelmed nervous system.
Routine is key to managing unpredictability. The routine should be structured almost like a religious ritual. The morning has to include centering techniques like meditation or hatha yoga to ground them for the day.
And the evening has to be calming.
Strictly calming. Reading uplifting books, writing, taking a bath. They are advised to strictly avoid overstimulating, violent, or distressing media like the news or action movies. They have to actively use their senses to calm the system. Relaxing background music, earplugs, essential oils like lavender, regular massage, these are all tools for managing nervous system overload.
Since SSPs are described as being super allergic to earthling foods, their dietary needs become highly specialized. It's essentially a customized medical plan.
It really is. A healthy diet for the SSP has to prioritize organic vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and low-fat protein to minimize toxic input. And they must radically reduce consumption of common, modern adjuvants, sugar, preservatives, high amounts of salt, processed foods, and critically, high glycemic histamine elevating foods.
Because those can trigger inflammation.
And contribute to that system-wide feeling of being on fire.
So what specific types of foods are recommended to provide that necessary calming, nurturing effect for a hyperactive nervous system?
The calming, nurturing foods are described as heavy, warm, and moist dishes, things like hearty soups and casseroles. Interestingly, the sources suggest focusing on a heavy, almost keto-style diet, as light, dry, or cold foods might not provide the necessary grounding.
And there's a specific rule about exercise.
Yeah, they are advised not to work out vigorously after 6 p.m. because the resulting adrenaline spike can easily prevent the SSP from reaching the deep, restorative sleep they so desperately need.
When seeking medical help, the sources recommend a specific, highly aware type of practitioner.
They advise seeking an SS naturopath or MD, someone with a super awareness who understands that the root of the issue is systemic and neurological sensitivity, not just a surface ailment.
So the focus has to be holistic.
It has to be. Addressing the physical consequences of chronic stress, adrenal fatigue, supporting their digestive and elimination systems, often through a nutritional balancing program. Homeopathy and acupuncture are suggested as suitable, gentle modalities for balancing the nervous system without harsh intervention.
And finally, the sources emphasize that traditional cognitive talk-based therapy, like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is not sufficient on its own. Why is that?
Well, while talk therapy is valuable for gaining intellectual insight, psychosomatic or body therapy, experience is deemed absolutely crucial.
And the reason is?
The reason is profound. Talk therapy alone cannot teach the person how to tolerate the overwhelming physical sensations, feelings, and emotions that arise during overload. Body therapy, on the other hand, allows the SSP to learn how to stay centered and grounded in the middle of an intense physical experience. This mastery is necessary to fully embrace the gift of sensitivity, rather than constantly trying to suppress or escape it.
To bring this concept of physical, genetic uniqueness to a head, let's return to that powerful anecdote involving the chemist Alexander Shulgin. This story just beautifully illustrates the dramatic variance in sensitivity among humans, especially regarding substances.
This anecdote serves as a clear, real-world example of what it means to be genetically ultra-sensitive. Alexander Shulgin, the famous researcher of psychoactive compounds, he conducted an experiment with 200 students. He passed around a vial containing a novel chemical compound, likely an aromatic compound.
And the result was stark.
Incredibly so. 198 of the students couldn't smell the compound at all. It was nothing to them.
But the remaining two had a severe reaction.
Yes. 2 students became so overwhelmed by the odor that they became physically sick, nauseous, and distressed, just from exposure to trace amounts of the chemical. Shulgin explained that those 2 people were likely up to 50,000 times more sensitive to that compound than the general population.
50,000 times.
Due to a specific gene for sensitivity to aromatic compounds.
That magnitude of difference, 1 to 50,000, is critical. It shows that sensitivity isn't just about emotional nuance. It's about profound biological variation in how we process the world's chemical inputs.
It absolutely does. Since aromatic compounds are closely related to many drugs, this profound genetic difference means that substances which are benign or even non-perceptible to the numb normal population can be instantly toxic or overwhelming to the ultrasensitive person. It's a literal biological imperative to avoid environmental toxins.
And this inherent extreme sensitivity leads to a necessary warning regarding the use of mind-altering substances, like psychedelics.
Due to their already high capacity for deep processing and their very thin boundaries, psychedelics, which the sources describe as boundary dissolvents, must be used with extreme caution and judiciousness by USPs. Their sensitive system means the effects could be radically amplified, the experience could be completely overwhelming, and the resulting integration much, much more difficult than for a non-sensitive person whose boundaries are already thick and protective.
So this deep dive has explored the full spectrum of the supersensitive soul, from the biological truth of a leaky thalamus filter and chronic HPA axis hyperactivity, all the way to the existential belief of being an advanced soul on a low-frequency planet. And we concluded with the necessary extreme lifestyle modifications required for a life of survival and flourishing.
And the sources consistently present the SSP experience as defined by intensity. A touch is a blow, a misfortune is a tragedy, a joy is an ecstasy. But we end on this narrative of affirmation. We should remember E.M. Forster's perspective, which was quoted in the source material. He champions SSPs as an aristocracy of the sensitive, the considerate, and the plucky, who represent nothing less than the true human tradition.
And this leads to what I think is the most powerful paradigm-shifting insight we gained today. True suffering and mental distress for the supersensitive is not an inherent flaw, but a healthy and irrational response to being forced to live in a super insensitive, hostile, pathology-producing culture.
Right.
The SSP is not broken. The world is inefficient and overwhelming.
It fundamentally shifts the burden of adaptation. If the default culture, that simian sedocracy, is defined by crassness, callousness, and crudeness, then the sensitive soul's reaction is entirely justified. Their distress is evidence of their health and their integrity.
So we leave you with this final thought, dear listener. If the mainstream estimate is correct, that 15 to 20% of the population shares this deeply analytical, justice-oriented trait, and they are defined by their deep need for a curated, low-stimuli environment to perform at their best, what radical changes might society have to make to its systems, from the workplace to education, to truly recognize and nurture these visionaries instead of continuously demanding they simply toughen up? Until next time, keep digging deep.